Welcome, welcome. So this is the wrap-up day for Berkeley. We're going to finish up a little bit from the second dialogue, hit some high points from the third, then offer a couple of critical comments. Okay. Now, in the second dialogue, Hylas becomes somewhat, it starts as a bit of a skeptic, saying that he agrees with Philonus. Well, he doesn't, according to Philonus, because Philonus believes that his system indicates that God must exist, and also he's no skeptic. Okay? But before we get to that section, let me describe another proof that occurs in section 29 of the Principles on page 493. And right here, this is actually Thompson's account of this. Okay? Let's look at this proof. Let's continue on the next slide, by the way. Our ideas of cause, or ideas of sense, must have a cause. First, second. Ideas of sense, unlike those of imagination, do not depend on our will, so they must have some other cause. In other words, we can't cause them. Okay? C. Ideas of sense are not caused by material objects, since matter does not exist, as we proved last time. Then D, 4, 3, yeah. Ideas of sense cannot be caused by other ideas, since ideas are inactive and have no power of agency. They cannot be the cause of anything. Okay, Berkeley has this idea, this conception of ideas as them being completely inert. Only spirits have potency. Okay, then E. Therefore, our ideas of sense must be caused by some other mind, since this is the only other possible explanation. Here we go. This mind must be God. Why? Consider our ideas of sense. First, they're always internally consistent, so they're the product of only one mind, not many minds. Second, they're incredibly varied and complex, so the source must be of unimaginable power. Third, despite their infinite variety and complexity, these ideas are ordered to such a minute detail so as to make the most detailed scientific investigation show consistency. I mean, the world, this is why science is possible, this is why physics is possible, and all that, right? So, this mind must be benevolent. This cause, then, must be unique, unimaginably powerful, and benevolent. Lo and behold, that sounds like God. Okay? This is a much more satisfying picture than Locke's, according to Berkeley, because Locke's system doesn't need God. Okay? For Locke, God creates matter, and then matter causes ideas to emerge in our minds. What does God do? Once God creates the world, then God can go on vacation, take off, get out of here, right? Berkeley wants to put God right back at the center of everything. And he wants to combat the atheism that he sees in Locke. Okay? Notice that for Berkeley, God is big, super big. And God and the world are truly intimate because the world exists primarily as ideas in the mind of God. Okay? So this God is this God is way more intimate with the world than either for Descartes or even Leibniz. Spinoza might be his rival, even though Berkeley's God is more active. A second argument for God's existence. This one's in the text. In this portion, Hylas has just called Philonus a skeptic, and skeptic notes, no, I'm not a skeptic. Okay? And this is on page 516. Yeah. And from that first part, we can construct bottom of page 516 to 517, just that brief Philonus right there. He says, I deny that I agreed with you in those notions that led to skepticism. You indeed said that reality of sensible things consists of an absolute existence out of the mind's spirits, or distinct from their being perceived. And pursuant to this notion of reality, you're obliged to deny sensible things in your real existence. That is, according to your own definition, you profess yourself to be a skeptic. But I neither said nor thought the reality of sensible things was to be defined after that manner. To me it is evident, for the reasons you allow, that sensible things cannot exist otherwise in the mind or spirit. From this I conclude that, not that they have no real existence, okay, but that seeing they do not depend on my thought, they have an existence distinct from being perceived by me, there must be some other mind in which they exist. As sure, therefore, as the sensible world exists, so there is an infinite omnipresent spirit who contains and supports it. Okay. From this kind of argument, we can derive this argument right here. This is also from Thompson. All ideas must be perceived. Sensible objects are collections of ideas. Objects continue to exist when they are not perceived by any finite minds. Therefore, there is a non-finite spirit which perceives objects. Okay, this proof is kind of odd, right? I mean, the premise 2 depends on the truth of Berkeley's idealism that sensible objects are merely collections of ideas, or are. And premise 3 assumes that objects continue to exist even when they're not perceived by finite minds. This principle, some call this the continuity principle, but let's consider this. Can Berkeley just assume that? Is there what kind of evidence can we have that when I close the door of the refrigerator, the beer is still there? Can I do that? I don't know. Okay. Let's go to the third dialogue. We're going to hit a few points from this one. Okay. Again, we see Hylas has become a skeptic along the lines, once again, that Berkeley sees Descartes and Locke leading us. This is definitely, he's offering here a very directed attack at, primarily at Locke. And we're going to look at this. Let's move forward to 525, 526. Let's look at this Philonus right here. Okay. This is right after Hylas has expressed his skepticism. Philonus says, "You amaze me. Was anything ever more wild and extravagant than the notions you now maintain? Is it not evident that you are led into all these extravagances by the belief of material substances? Material substance, I should say. This makes you dream of those unknown natures and everything. It is this which occasions your distinguishing between the reality and sensible appearances of things. It is to this you're indebted for your being ignorant of what everybody else knows perfectly well. Nor is this all. You're not only ignorant of the true nature of everything, but you do not know whether anything really exists and whether there are any true natures at all. This is what happens when you believe that you can perceive your own ideas. You can't perceive things themselves, and yet you also believe that material substance is out there causing these things when you can't even experience it. Okay? For as much as you attribute to your material beings an absolute or external existence in which you suppose the reality consists, and as you are forced to in the end, to acknowledge that such an existence means either a direct repugnance or nothing at all, it follows that you're obliged to pull down your own hypothesis of material substance and positively deny the real existence of any part of the universe. And so you are plunged in the deepest and most deplorable skepticism that man ever was. Tell me, Hylas, is it not so?" And on 487, later on that same page, on 526, this leads Philonus. Okay, Hylas then says, okay, but suppose you're not looking at something. Suppose no one's looking at something. Does it still exist? Okay. This leads Philonus to restate the continuity thesis, which I've reproduced on the slide right here. I can, but then it must be another mind. When I say that sensible things can't exist out of the mind, I don't mean my mind in particular, but all minds. Now, they clearly have an existence exterior to my mind, since I find by experience that they are independent of it. How could you experience that? There is therefore some other mind in which they exist during the intervals between the times which I perceive them, as likewise they did before my birth, and would do after my supposed annihilation. As the same is true with regard to all other finite created minds, it necessarily follows that there is an omnipresent eternal mind which knows and comprehends all things and lets us experience them in a certain manner according to rules that he has ordained and that we call the laws of nature. Now, at this point, so that's the continuity thesis. That's also one of the arguments for God's existence. We have to have this infinite spirit to ensure that things continue to exist when no one's around to see them. Okay? At this point, Hylas brings up a significant problem. Okay? And here it is stated right here. I've excerpted this out of that longer passage. If you have no idea of the mind of God, how can you conceive to be possible the things that exist in his mind? That is, if you have no idea of his mind, how can you have any thought about his mind? On the other hand, if you can have a thought about the mind of God without having an idea of him, then why can't I conceive the existence of matter without having an idea of it? This is a significant problem potentially for Berkeley. Okay, notice this. Okay, we can't have ideas of minds or other minds because minds are perfectly active and ideas are inert. Okay, so which means I can't have an idea of God either. I mean, if we could have an idea of these things, then why can't I conceive of the existence of matter without having an idea of it? This is a very good point he makes. On 527, Philonus offers this really long response that covers almost that whole first column on the second, in which he dissembles a lot there. Okay, and in Philonus's long response, he admits that he doesn't have an idea of God properly, or for that matter, of any other spirit, because again, spirits are active while ideas are inert. So spirits cannot be represented by ideas. But this very queer sentence down there, about most of the way through that, he says, he notes that he has a notion of God. He says, I have therefore, though not an active idea, yet in myself some sort of an acting, thinking image of the deity. Really? Ideas are either inert or inactive, or they're not. Interesting. Now, on the next page, Berkeley defends his view as just plain old common sense. Okay? So Hylas just says, ask the first man you meet, and he shall tell you to be perceived as one thing and to exist as another. Berkeley's response here is to defend this view, this quirky view, as common sense. I'm content, Hylas, to appeal to the common sense of the world for the truth of my view. Ask the gardener why he thinks that cherry tree over there exists in the garden, and he will tell you, because he sees and feels it. In short, because he perceives it by his senses. Ask him why he thinks there's no orange tree there, and he will tell you, because he doesn't perceive one. When he perceives something by sense, he terms it a real thing and says it exists. Anything that isn't perceivable, he says, doesn't exist. Okay. Berkeley basically in these passages right here has pointed out that, look, matter is impossible, mind is not. Okay? Which brings Hylas to rejoin. What about dreams? To be is to be perceived. In dreams I perceive things. Doesn't your thesis entail that dreams have to be real as well? Philonus. Not if we make a distinction between ideas of imagination and ideas of sense. Ideas of sense, he says, differ from imagination in the following ways. First, the latter, ideas of sense are stronger and more lively. Okay, they're livelier. Second, and more importantly, they're ordered and have coherence. Third, and perhaps most importantly, they are passively received, so they do not depend on our will. Berkeley claims that is satisfactory to distinguish between dreams and real life, as it were. Okay? Hylas then brings up a very interesting point here. Okay, God is the cause of the vast majority of our ideas other people can cause ideas and utility spirits can, but God is the cause of our ideas. Then God is also the author of murder, sacrilege, adultery, and the like heinous sins. So says Hylas. At the bottom of 529, sorry. That's 529. Let's look at that. In answer to that, I observe, first, that the imputation of guilt is the same, whether a person commits an action with or without an instrument. In case, therefore, you suppose God to act by the mediation of an instrument on occasion you call matter, you so truly make him the author of sin as I, who think him the immediate agent in all those operations vocally ascribed to nature. I further observe that sin or moral turpitude does not consist in the outward physical action or motion, but the internal deviation of the will from the laws of reason and religion. This is plain in that killing an enemy in a battle, or putting a criminal legally to death, is not thought sinful, though the outward acts the very same with the case of murder. Since, therefore, the sin does not consist in the physical action, making God an immediate cause of all such actions is not making him the author of sin. Lastly, I've nowhere said that God is the only agent who produces all the motions in bodies. It is true that I have denied that there are any other agents besides spirits, but this is very consistent with allowing to thinking rational beings and the production of motions, and the use of limited powers will be indeed derived from God, but immediately under the direction of their wills, which is sufficient to entitle them to all the guilt in their actions. I'm not sure about that, honestly. Now, we're going to conclude this portion with two big problems in Berkeley. Okay? Note that, remember, back in that first part of the principles, he offered us an extended critique of innate ideas. Of abstract ideas, excuse me. We did that already in law. And what this means is that all perceptions are particular. If this is the case, then can you and I see the same thing, or must we always see numerically distinct things? Okay? Let's look at page 535 in Berkeley's responses. It's a little bit longish, but that's okay. This is the end of that first column right there, the second column there that goes on the next page. Yes, so Hylas says, does it not follow from your principles that no two can see the same thing? Is this not highly absurd? Okay. Remember, all ideas are numerically particular and are numerically different images. Okay. If the term same be taken in the vulgar, in the vulgar meaning, it is certain, and not at all repugnant principles I maintain, that different persons may perceive the same thing, or the same thing or idea exist in different minds. Words are of arbitrary impositions. And since men are accustomed to apply the word same, where no distinction of variety is perceived, I do not pretend to alter their perception. It follows that, as men have said before, several saw the same thing, so they may upon like occasions still continue to use the same phrase without any deviation, either from propriety of language or the truth of things. But if the term same is used in the meaning of philosophers, who pretend to an abstracted notion of identity, then according to their sundry definitions, this notion, for which is not yet agreed what philosophical identity consists, it may or may not be possible for various persons to perceive the same thing. But whether philosophers shall think fit to call a thing the same or not is, I conceive, of small importance. Let us suppose several men together, all endow the same faculties, and consequently affected in like sort by their senses, who have not yet known the use of language. They would without question agree in their perceptions, though perhaps when they came to the use of speech, some regarding the uniformity of what was perceived might call the same thing, others, especially regarding the diversity of persons who perceived, might choose the denomination of different things. But who does not see that all disputes about a word, namely, whether what is perceived by different persons may yet have the term same applied to it? Or suppose a house whose walls or outward shell remaining unaltered the chambers are all pulled down and new ones built in their place. If that you should call this the same, I should say it was not the same house. Would we not for all this perfectly agree on our thoughts the house considered in itself? It were not all the difference considered in a sound. If you should say we differ in our notions, for that you superadded your idea of the house, the simple abstracted idea of identity, whereas I did not. I would tell you that I do not know what you mean by that abstracted idea of identity, and I should desire you to look into your own thoughts and be sure you understand yourself. Why so silent, Hylas? Are you not yet satisfied that men may dispute about identity and diversity without any real difference in their thoughts and opinions abstracted from names? Take this further reflection with you, that whether matter be allowed to exist or not, the case is exactly the same as the point at hand. The materialists themselves acknowledge that immediately perceived by our senses what we immediately perceive by our senses to be our own ideas. Your difficulty, therefore, that no two see the same things make equally against the materialists and me. Berkeley here, it seems that he wants to say that in a sense we can have the same idea, but is that what we mean by the same idea? They may be qualitatively the same, but they cannot be numerically the same. And that seems to be what we mean by the same thing, that we actually literally have the same idea. Can we? Berkeley says, probably not. Okay. Final problem, and this one is a general one. A thing that we haven't yet brought up about Berkeley is the possibility of skepticism and solipsism. Okay? Logically speaking, it seems that from Berkeley's thesis that if there are ideas, then there are minds to perceive those ideas, then I can only prove that my own mind exists. Can he argue for the existence of other minds? All I can perceive after all are my own ideas, okay? And even those are put there by God. Do I have any reason to believe that you too are a mind and that you have a will? Or, even more, do we have an idea of mind? Well, no. We know it by intuition, he says. He says that we don't have an idea of mind, but we do have a notion of mind. Okay? Is there a real difference between the two? This is vague for me. So we have 4 questions to sort of to wrap this up and come to a conclusion about this. First of all, if there is no matter, why not no mind? Okay, I mean, isn't that the same kind of thing? His answer is, matter is contradictory while mind is not. Second, since we have no idea of mind, strictly speaking, remember, we don't have an idea of it because spirits are active, ideas are inert. Do we have any reason to think that it exists? Okay, his answer to that, there must be a mind in order to perceive ideas. Given, though, that we have no idea of mind, how can we acquire a notion of it? Okay, his answer to that is, we know it by reflection, and I have immediate knowledge of it. But, isn't mind just another abstract idea? Okay, how is matter an abstract idea, but mind isn't? Ultimately, it seems like it has to follow the same fate as matter does. Perhaps. All of these kinds of problems probably led Berkeley later in life to modify his views. He became ultimately a Christian Neoplatonist, arguing that God's thoughts or realities or forms and ours are just poor copies. This view wasn't nearly as original as his earlier view that we just considered, so we still remember him for that early stuff. Okay? It almost seems like he saw his own empiricism wasn't quite taken to its logical conclusion, just as he saw with Locke. Okay? And apparently, he didn't like where he saw it going. Okay? But, in spite of himself, Berkeley will be remembered as an empiricist, and perhaps as a bridge from Locke to Hume. Okay, Locke started it, Berkeley carried a little bit further, and Hume, he doesn't share those concerns, and he will carry this basic methodology to its logical conclusions, as we shall see. Okay, we have one more thing, and that is the assignment here. Okay, and this is one I always like to focus on there somewhere, some way. When these dialogues were first published, Samuel Johnson's sidekick and biographer John Boswell asked Johnson what he thought of them. Johnson kicked a nearby stump or a rock, depending on which account you read. I've read both of them. He declared, "Thus do I refute Mr. Berkeley. How strong is this refutation? How would Berkeley or Philonus reply?" Okay. Johnson and Berkeley were actually friends, and I don't have any idea how true this story is, but I heard once that Berkeley had invited Johnson over for his house for dinner, and Johnson had invited Berkeley over. Berkeley was knocking on the door, and Johnson said, "Just come to the door. It's just an idea, right? It's not real. It's not material substance." So, we're going to see how strong is this refutation of Berkeley or Philonus, and how would Berkeley or Philonus reply. This is probably, about a page and a half, maybe two. Okay? See ya.